find you. I used to think that was bollocks. Now I realize. You can't outrun the past. When we were kids, we start fights with the toughest bastards in the yard. I was the one. But to step in and finish him. You'd steal from the corner shop. But it was me. Who break the old man's belt. I'd hoped you'd outgrown it. Playing the gangster made you harder, smarter. Better. But deep down again. Guess I always knew you'd end up like this. Despite everything I did teach you. Still, you're more flesh and blood. So you remain. I crossed the bear. Rest now, little brother. While I sell you one last score.
Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long, golden shadows over the city. Los Angeles was alive, buzzing with the energy of millions of lives intersecting in a chaotic, vibrant dance. In the heart of it all, Dom Toretto's garage was a sanctuary, a place where time seemed to slow, and the weight of the world could momentarily be forgotten. The garage, with its grease-smeared walls and the familiar hum of engines, was a haven for Dom and his crew, a place that had seen them through countless battles, high-speed chases, and near-death experiences. But now, it felt different. Something was hanging in the air, a tension that no one could shake. Dominic Toretto stood alone in the middle of the garage, his hands resting on the hood of his beloved muscle car, the Charger. He stared at the engine, his brow furrowed, deep in thought. The past few months had been a blur of celebrations, new beginnings, and dangerous missions. But something was missing. He could feel it, a shift in the rhythm of his life, as though a storm was gathering on the horizon, waiting to strike when they least expected it. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text message from Brian O'Connor, his brother in every sense except blood. "You good?" It read, the simplicity of the words bringing a small smile to Dom's face. Brian had always been the optimist, the one who could find hope even in the darkest of times. But lately, Dom had seen a change in his friend, too. Brian was starting to question his place in this world, the world of high-speed chases, high-stakes heists, and enemies that seemed to multiply with every victory. Dom's phone buzzed again, this time a call. It was Letty. "Dom," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "We need to talk. Meet me at the spot." He didn't need to ask what spot. The two of them had spent hours, days, maybe even weeks there, talking about everything and nothing. It was where they had reconnected, rebuilt their bond after her disappearance and the long road to finding herself again. Letty always had a way of reading him, seeing right through the walls he put up. She knew that something wasn't right, even if Dom wasn't ready to admit it yet. "On my way," Dom replied, ending the call with a deep breath. He knew what this conversation would be about. The world had changed, and so had they. The familiar hum of Dom's car echoed through the quiet streets of L.A. as he made his way to the spot. It was a secluded location, perched on a high ridge that overlooked the city, a perfect place for reflection. As he arrived, he saw Letty leaning against the guardrail, staring out at the city below. The city that had been their playground, their battleground, and for a time, their home. But now, it felt like a distant memory. Letty didn't turn when she heard the sound of Dom's car approaching. She knew he'd be there soon, just like he always was. She had been waiting for this moment, for the inevitable confrontation that had been hanging in the air like a storm cloud. "Dom," she said softly, still not looking at him. "You've been distant lately. What's going on?" Dom leaned against the railing beside her, his eyes following the sprawling lights of the city. For a long moment, he didn't answer. The truth was, he didn't know. Every time he thought about his future, he saw a never-ending road filled with danger and uncertainty. His family had grown, the crew had expanded, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. The world they had built was always one step away from crumbling. "I don't know, Letty," Dom finally confessed, his voice low. "I feel like we're always looking over our shoulders. There's always someone out there who wants to bring us down. And no matter how many battles we win, I can't help but think the worst is yet to come." Letty's eyes softened as she turned to face him. She understood what he was feeling. They had both lost so much, and yet they kept fighting. But the cost of that fight was becoming more apparent with each passing day. "I get it," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But we can't keep living in fear, Dom. We've been through too much together. We've built something strong, something real. We can't let it all go because of what might happen." Dom turned to look at her, his expression conflicted. "I don't know how to keep it together, Letty. I don't know how to keep this family safe when it feels like the world is closing in on us." Before Letty could respond, a loud roar of engines interrupted the moment. Dom's instincts kicked in, and he straightened up, scanning the area for the source of the noise. The sound of multiple cars racing down the road, tires screeching, engines revving. Something was wrong. Without a word, Dom and Letty exchanged a glance, both of them immediately on alert. They moved to their cars, prepared for whatever threat was coming their way. "Stay close," Dom muttered, his voice resolute. Letty nodded, her expression hardening. She wasn't going to let anything happen to their family, no matter the cost. The roar of the engines grew louder, and the first of the cars came into view. It was an unfamiliar car, sleek, black, and menacing. A car designed for speed, but more importantly, designed for intimidation. The driver, hidden behind tinted windows, wasn't interested in racing. This was a message, and the message was clear. The Toretto crew was being targeted once again. As the car screeched to a stop in front of them, Dom's hand instinctively reached for the handle of his door. He wasn't about to wait for trouble to come to him. "Let's go," he said, his voice low with determination. The storm was here, and there was no turning back. End of Chapter 1. In this opening chapter, I've established the emotional tension, foreshadowed the looming threat, and set the stage for the action and drama that will follow. The focus is on Dom and Letty's relationship, their personal struggles, and the uncertainty that shadows their lives. This sets up the journey they're about to embark on, where loyalty, family, and vengeance will be tested in ways they never imagined. Would you like me to continue with the next chapter or explore a specific aspect of the story further? Here's my rewritten version of the content, capturing the emotional undercurrents and tension while weaving a different narrative voice. Chapter 1. The tension in the air. The day was fading, the sun sinking beneath the jagged skyline, casting an amber glow over Los Angeles. The city's pulse throbbed like a living, breathing thing, its lights flickering on one by one, as if marking the start of something inevitable. Beneath the hum of urban chaos, there was a place where time paused, Dom Toretto's garage. It stood like an anchor in the storm, its gritty walls and the comforting rhythm of engines a silent witness to the battles, the victories, and the losses that had defined Dom and his crew. But tonight, the garage felt different. There was a quiet, unnerving stillness that clung to the air, like the calm before an unseen storm. Dominic Toretto stood at the center of the space, hands resting on the hood of his iconic Charger. His eyes were locked on the engine, but his thoughts were far away, drifting like smoke in the wind. The past few months had been a blur, moments of joy mixed with adrenaline-fueled chaos. But now, a subtle emptiness lingered in the corners of his mind. He could feel the impending storm, the weight of something dark and unavoidable creeping closer, like an inevitable collision with destiny. His phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. It was Brian O'Connor, his brother in every sense but blood. "You good?" The text read. It was short, but it hit harder than Dom expected. Brian had always been the optimist, the one who kept the light on in the darkest times. But Dom could sense a change in him, too. The carefree spark in Brian's eyes was fading. He, too, was starting to question the life they'd chosen, the constant danger, the endless chases, the betrayal that never seemed to stop. Before Dom could reply, the phone buzzed again. It was Letty. "Dom," she said, her voice calm but layered with concern. "We need to talk. Meet me at the spot." Dom didn't have to ask which spot. It was the place they always went when words were too heavy to carry, when silence spoke louder than anything else. It was where their connection had been reborn, where they had rebuilt the fragile bond between them after her long absence. Letty knew him better than anyone, knew the unspoken fears that had settled beneath his confident exterior. "I'm on my way," Dom replied, the words tasting heavier than usual. He already knew what this conversation was about. The world had changed, and so had they. The streets of Los Angeles passed by in a blur, the engine of Dom's car growling as it cut through the night. He drove with purpose, his mind still clouded by the tension he couldn't shake. The spot was ahead, a secluded ridge that offered a sweeping view of the city. As he pulled up, Dom saw Letty standing at the guardrail, staring into the distance. She didn't turn when she heard his approach. She knew he was coming. She had been waiting for this moment, this inevitable confrontation. "Dom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she continued to look out over the city. "You've been distant lately. What's going on?" Dom walked up beside her, his gaze following the endless stretch of city lights below. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The words they needed to say hung heavy between them, but neither could bring themselves to speak them. "I don't know, Letty," he admitted at last, his voice low, almost resigned. "It's like I'm waiting for something bad to happen." No matter what we do, it feels like we're always one step from falling off the edge. We fought so hard, built something strong. But every time I think about the future, I see a road full of danger. I can't shake the feeling that the worst is still out there, waiting." Letty turned to face him then, her eyes soft with understanding, but firm. "I get it. We've lost so much, Dom. But we can't let fear control us. We've built something real here, something worth fighting for. You can't keep looking over your shoulder. We're not going to fall apart just because things feel uncertain." Dom's expression hardened as he met her gaze. "I don't know how to keep this all together, Letty. I don't know how to keep us safe when every day feels like it might be our last." Before Letty could respond, the sound of roaring engines shattered the stillness, snapping both of them to attention. Instinctively, Dom straightened, his senses immediately on high alert. The screech of tires and the growl of engines. Something was coming. And it wasn't good. Without a word, Dom and Letty exchanged a brief, understanding glance. They were ready. They always were. "Stay close," Dom muttered, his voice a promise. Letty nodded, her resolve solidifying. No matter what came next, she wouldn't let anything tear their family apart. The first car came into view, sleek and black, its silhouette sharp against the dimming city lights. It wasn't just any car, it was a message. A warning. And that message was clear. They were being targeted again. The car screeched to a halt in front of them, its engine dying with an eerie finality. Dom's hand found the door handle instinctively. This wasn't a time to wait. This was a time to act. "Let's go," he said, his voice filled with unspoken determination. The storm had arrived. And this time, there would be no turning back. End of Chapter 1. In this version, I focused on creating a more introspective and atmospheric opening, emphasizing the quiet tension before the storm hits. The emotional depth of Dom and Letty's relationship is highlighted, and the looming threat feels like an inevitable consequence of their lifestyle. Chapter 2. The hunt begins. The black car sat in front of them like a predator, waiting. The growl of its engine died down, leaving an eerie silence that stretched across the secluded ridge. Dom's eyes never left the vehicle as he stood tall beside Letty, both of them poised for whatever came next. The tension was palpable, thicker than the air around them. Letty's hand hovered near the gun holstered at her side, a silent promise that she was ready for whatever trouble was about to come knocking. The driver's side door opened with a sharp click, and a tall figure stepped out. He was clad in dark, tactical gear, a silhouette that seemed to exude danger and precision. The stranger's face remained hidden in shadow, but the aura of menace was unmistakable. He looked like someone who had been bred for war, someone who didn't care about the rules of engagement. Dom didn't flinch. He didn't need to. He had seen this kind of threat before. "Who are you?" Dom called out, his voice steady but edged with warning. The moment was like an unspoken challenge, one that demanded an answer, one that could either end with words or violence. The stranger's lips curled into a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't need to know my name, Toretto," he said, his voice low and almost mocking. "What you do need to know is that your little family has made some enemies. Big ones." Letty's gaze never wavered from the stranger as she moved closer to Dom, her body language a quiet show of solidarity. They had fought together too many times to count, and they weren't going to let some random threat intimidate them now. "What do you want?" Dom's voice was more demanding now, the patience draining from him as his instincts told him this encounter was far from casual. This was something deeper, something darker. The man's smile grew, but there was a flash of something cold in his eyes. "I'm not the one who wants you, Toretto," he said, his tone darkening. "But I've been sent to make sure you get the message. And let me tell you, there are people who are very interested in making you and your crew disappear." At those words, Letty stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "If you think you can intimidate us, you're gravely mistaken." The stranger raised a hand, signaling to the other vehicles now lining the road behind him. More cars. More bodies. The stakes were rising, and this was no longer a simple confrontation. "We're just getting started," the man said, turning to walk back to his vehicle. "You'll see." Before Dom or Letty could react, the stranger was back in his car, and with a screech of tires, the group of black cars surged forward, disappearing down the winding road into the night. Dom and Letty stood there for a moment, watching the trail of dust left behind by the sudden attack, their minds racing with questions that had no answers. "This isn't over," Dom muttered, his voice low. He wasn't sure who had sent this mysterious figure, but he knew one thing for certain: they were no longer dealing with small-time criminals. This was something bigger. Something dangerous. Back in the heart of the city, Brian O'Connor sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hand, but his thoughts far from the warmth of the mug. He had been receiving strange calls and messages over the past few days, encrypted texts with no return numbers, cryptic warnings that didn't make sense. He had tried to push them to the back of his mind, convinced that it was just a matter of time before someone from their past tried to resurface. It was the nature of the world they lived in, a world where enemies came in all shapes and sizes, and every victory was followed by an inevitable reckoning. But when the phone buzzed again with an unrecognized number, Brian's instincts kicked in. He had learned to trust those instincts over the years. They were what had kept him alive in the chaos of the streets and the wars they had fought. He glanced down at the screen, his heart rate quickening as a familiar name appeared. "Dom," he muttered, quickly picking up the phone. "What's going on?" "Brian, listen to me." Dom's voice came through, tense and urgent. "We've got trouble. Some guy showed up out of nowhere. He's got some kind of message for us. Something big's coming, and I need you here." Brian's mind raced. This wasn't just a random attack or some road rage incident. It was something far more serious. "I'm on my way," he said, cutting the call. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. His mind flashed to Mia and their young son, Jack. Every time he ventured into this world, there was always a part of him that hesitated. He had promised Mia he was done with the chaos, that they were done with the danger. But there was no turning back now. The family needed him. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Roman Pierce and Tej Parker were in their usual domain, a high-tech garage stacked with gadgets and custom cars. The place was cluttered with parts, monitors, and screens flashing with data. Roman was lounging on a chair, flipping through his phone, while Tej worked on a new set of engines. "Yo, Tej," Roman called out, snapping his fingers to get his attention. "You hearing this? Some guy's out there threatening Dom and Letty. And you know what that means, right?" Tej didn't look up from his work, but his fingers paused on the keyboard. "It means we're gonna have to deal with whoever this is, and I have a feeling it's not going to be a simple car chase." Roman grinned. "Nah, man. It never is. But you know I love me some action." He sat up, putting his phone down and stretching. "Besides, Dom and Letty are like family. Ain't no way I'm sitting this one out." Tej finally turned to look at him, a faint smile on his lips. "You're right. Let's gear up. We're gonna need everything we've got for this one." And just like that, the crew was back together. No questions asked. No hesitation. When one of them was in danger, they all answered the call. Back at the garage, Dom's thoughts were heavy. The threat was real, and the crew needed to be ready. He knew what this meant: another fight. Another battle for their survival. But no matter the odds, no matter how dangerous it got, Dom would do whatever it took to protect his family. They had been through too much to let it all fall apart now. And so, with the rest of his team rallying around him, Dom Toretto prepared for the war that was about to come. End of Chapter 2. In this chapter, we begin to see the shadowy forces that are targeting Dom and his crew. The introduction of new characters and the stakes heighten as they prepare for the impending conflict. The emotional core of the family dynamic is further explored as Brian, Roman, and Tej join the fray. Would you like to continue with Chapter 3, or would you prefer to dive deeper into a specific character's arc or event? Here's my take on Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The First Strike. The world felt like it had shifted into overdrive. Dom's hands tightened around the steering wheel, the familiar growl of the Charger beneath him serving as a steady pulse amidst the chaos. The streets of L.A., bathed in the artificial glow of neon signs and streetlights, blurred around him. But Dom wasn't looking at the city. His mind was miles away, on the black car that had rolled up with such intent, and the message it had carried. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins. He could feel the energy in the air, the tension crackling like static. Everything felt off. The calm had been too calm. The warning signs had been there, but he had refused to see them, until now. "Stay alert," he muttered under his breath, his grip tightening further as he maneuvered the car through the winding streets. Letty sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, but her mind was just as busy. She could feel the weight of what was coming, and the unsettling silence between them spoke louder than words. The world they had fought to build was starting to crumble around them, and they hadn't even seen the first blow land. "What do you think they want?" Letty's voice cut through the stillness, barely above the rumble of the engine. "This feels different. Whoever that was, they're not here for a race." Dom's jaw clenched. He knew she was right. This wasn't about speed or adrenaline. This was something more calculated, more dangerous. "They want to send a message," Dom said, his voice low and steady. "And we're the message." Letty looked over at him, her eyes narrowing. She could see it in his eyes, the same realization that had dawned on her. They were back in the crosshairs. The peace they'd fought for, the quiet after all the chaos, it was over. "Do you think it's someone we know?" Letty asked, her tone more cautious now. Dom shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever they are, they're not going to stop." They were nearing their destination, the spot where they had agreed to meet. Dom parked the car with a sharp turn, the tires squealing against the pavement before coming to a halt. The silence was oppressive now, thicker than ever, as the two of them sat there for a moment, their minds sinking in a way that only years of being together could bring. "Let's go," Dom finally said, breaking the tension. They both knew there was no time to waste. The game had changed, and it was time to face it head-on. The two of them stepped out of the car, the night air cool against their skin. The city stretched out before them, a sprawling maze of lights and shadows. Dom's eyes scanned the horizon, his instincts kicking in. He knew that whoever had sent the car wasn't far behind. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. Letty moved beside him, her presence a quiet strength. They didn't need to speak, they had been in situations like this before. The world they lived in, where loyalty and family were the only things that mattered, had always been one step from destruction. But this felt different. This felt personal. "Any sign of trouble?" Letty asked, her voice a whisper. Dom shook his head. "Not yet. But I can feel it. Something's coming." They walked in sync, their steps firm and steady, until they reached the old warehouse, their meeting place. It was a place of refuge, where the crew had gathered countless times to discuss their next move. But tonight, it felt like a trap. The hairs on the back of Dom's neck stood up as he pushed the door open, the creaking of the hinges loud in the stillness. Inside, the shadows were long, and the air was thick with anticipation. The crew was already gathered, their faces grim, eyes filled with uncertainty. "Dom," Letty said, her voice laced with caution, "something's not right." Dom nodded slowly. He could feel it too. The air was charged with the kind of tension that came before a storm that had already begun to gather. "Everyone ready?" Dom asked, his voice steady but his gaze sharp. The crew exchanged looks. They were ready, but Dom could see it in their eyes. They knew, deep down, that things had changed. And they were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for everything they had built. As Dom stepped further into the room, the door slammed shut behind them. The sound echoed, sharp and final. The first blow had landed. End of Chapter 2. In this chapter, the threat grows more tangible as Dom and Letty face the reality that their past is catching up with them. The tension builds as they prepare to confront whatever danger is coming their way, setting the stage for the action that will unfold in the coming chapters. Chapter 3. A Family Reunited. The city of Los Angeles hummed beneath the evening sky as Dom, Letty, and the crew gathered in the familiar confines of the garage. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a few cars, but to them, it was more than a workshop. It was home. And right now, home was the only place that felt safe. Brian O'Connor pulled up in his car, the engine of his Nissan Skyline purring as he parked next to Dom's Charger. As he stepped out, the familiar sight of his old friend made his chest tighten. It had only been a few months since their last big job, but the weight of what had just happened, of what was coming, was heavy on both of them. Dom met Brian's gaze as they crossed paths, exchanging a quiet but understanding look. They had been through countless battles together, but something about this felt different. The stakes had been raised. "I never thought I'd be back here so soon," Brian said, his voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and resolve. He threw a look over his shoulder at Mia, who was waiting in their car. She didn't need to be part of this world, and he knew it. She hated it, hated the danger it brought into their lives. But he also knew that she understood that this was who he was. "Sometimes you don't get a choice," Dom replied, his voice low but resolute. His family was at risk, and there was no hesitation in him now. There hadn't been in years. But with every new challenge, every new enemy, the cost seemed to grow. Letty walked over to Brian, offering him a nod of acknowledgement before turning her gaze back toward Dom. The storm was coming, and the crew was ready to face whatever was ahead. "I've been thinking," Letty started, her voice calm but with an edge of concern, "about what he said. This isn't just some petty gang war. This feels bigger." Brian's brow furrowed. "Bigger how?" "I don't know," Letty said, crossing her arms. "But whoever this is, they aren't backing down. And they've got a message for us. Whoever's behind this, whoever's coming, means business." Dom clenched his fists, the tension of the situation settling in his muscles. He was never one to back down from a fight, but this felt different. There was an intensity in the air, a gnawing feeling deep in his gut that told him the danger they faced now wasn't just about fast cars and high-speed chases. It was about survival, and this time, it wouldn't just be the family on the line. "We need to figure out who we're dealing with," Dom said, his voice steady. "And we need to do it fast." The next morning, the crew, Dom, Letty, Brian, Roman, and Tej, sat around a table, maps and blueprints sprawled out in front of them. The cold, calculating nature of the situation was evident as they discussed their next moves. Each member of the crew was focused, their eyes sharp and their expressions set. This wasn't a job they could take lightly. Roman leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles with a grin. "All right, so let's get this straight. We're up against someone who knows how to play dirty, and we don't even know their name yet? Come on, Dom. How do you expect us to take them down if we don't know who we're dealing with?" Tej, who had been scanning through a list of encrypted communications on his tablet, didn't look up. "You're right, Roman. We don't know much, but we know that whoever these guys are, they're not your typical street-level punks. This is organized, it's global, and it's big." Brian leaned in, his eyes narrowed. "So, what are we looking for? What's the connection here?" Letty, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We've fought gangs, governments, and corrupt corporations before. But this feels different. This isn't just a threat to us, this is personal." Dom's gaze flickered toward her, understanding what she meant. He had a feeling that whoever was pulling the strings had their sights set on something far beyond just dismantling their crew. They were targeting their very foundation. "That's why we need to find the source of all this," Dom said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We need to get inside their operations, figure out who's running things, and make sure they know that family isn't something we take lightly." Roman snorted. "Yeah, that'll get their attention. Oh, look, the Toretto crew's getting involved again. Better call in the big guns." He looked over at Brian and Letty with a grin. "I love this job." Tej finally looked up from his tablet, a small frown on his face. "The encrypted messages we've been tracking come from multiple locations, all over the globe. We've got someone with a lot of resources pulling the strings. But they're not just hiding behind a computer. This person has real power, and we need to figure out what their endgame is." Brian's fingers tapped on the table, his mind racing. The puzzle was slowly coming together. They had the connections, they had the skills, and most importantly, they had the motivation. Whoever was behind this wasn't just going after them for sport. They were looking to break them, to destroy the family they had built. And no one touched his family. "We find out who's behind this," Brian said, determination hardening his features. "And we make them regret it." The following hours were a blur of action. The crew split up to follow leads and gather information. Roman and Tej worked their tech magic, diving into data, making calls, and hacking into encrypted communications. Brian and Letty hit the streets, talking to old contacts, finding anyone who might have information about the mysterious threat. And Dom did what he did best. He tracked down the pieces of the puzzle, following the trail of violence and intimidation, ready to take on whoever was behind it. It didn't take long before the pieces started to fall into place. The encrypted messages were traced back to a global syndicate, one that had been operating in the shadows for years. Their influence spread across borders, from South America to Eastern Europe, and they were ruthless in their methods. But there was one detail that stood out: the name Shaw. Deckard Shaw. It was a name that sent a shiver down Dom's spine. He knew the stories, knew the reputation. Shaw wasn't just another criminal. He was a soldier, trained in the deadliest methods of warfare. And now, he had come for them. Later that evening, Dom stood outside his garage, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew that this was only the beginning. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their legacy, for their family. The storm was approaching, and it was coming for everything they had built. But Dom wasn't afraid. Because no matter what came next, he knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. Family always comes first. End of Chapter 3. In this chapter, the crew regroups, shares information, and starts to piece together the scope of the threat they're facing. The revelation of Shaw's involvement brings the story to a boiling point, setting the stage for the action and drama that will unfold in the coming chapters. The family's resolve to protect each other is stronger than ever, and the stakes have never been higher. Would you like to continue with Chapter 4, or explore a different part of the story? Here's my take on Chapter 3. Chapter 3, The Calm Before the Surge. The night stretched on, thick with anticipation. Inside the old warehouse, Dom and Letty's crew sat in a tense silence, their faces etched with the kind of weariness that only years of constant battle could bring. The air felt dense, suffocating even, as though they were all holding their breath, waiting for something they couldn't yet see. Dom paced the length of the room, his mind racing. He had been in countless situations where danger loomed large, but this felt different. This wasn't a race or a heist, it was personal. Whoever was behind the black car, whoever sent the message, they weren't just targeting them for their skills or their reputation. No, this was something deeper. This was a challenge to everything they'd built. Letty leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She wasn't as quiet as the others, but she shared the same unspoken tension. She could feel the weight of Dom's thoughts, the pressure he was placing on himself. The man who had always been their rock, their protector, was now starting to crack. "We need answers," Dom finally said, his voice low, but his words sharp. "We can't just sit here waiting for them to make the next move." Roman, ever the skeptic, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And how exactly are we supposed to get answers? We don't even know who they are, let alone where to find them." Dom's gaze turned to Roman, his face hard. "We don't need to know everything. We just need to know where they'll be next." Letty pushed herself off the wall and walked to Dom, her steps deliberate. She placed a hand on his arm, steadying him. "We've been through worse, Dom. We've survived worse. But we need a plan." Dom's jaw clenched as he met her eyes. She was right, of course. They had been through hell and back, but it had always been with a clear purpose. Tonight, however, was different. The uncertainty gnawed at him. It was like he was fighting a battle without knowing the rules. "We make them come to us," he said, the words settling in his chest like a conviction. "We're not waiting around to be picked off one by one. We go on the offense. We hit them hard and fast." A murmur ran through the crew as they processed his words. Letty's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. She knew Dom too well. He wasn't the type to wait for someone to make the first move. "Then we get ready," Letty said, her voice firm. "We've got what we need. Now we make sure they don't see us coming." Hours later, the garage was alive with the sounds of engines revving, tools clanking, and the low hum of focused energy. The crew worked quickly and methodically, each person falling into their familiar roles. But this time, there was a certain urgency to their movements, an intensity that wasn't usually there. Dom stood at the center of the garage, his gaze flickering between the faces of his crew. He felt the weight of every decision pressing on him, felt the responsibility of each life that depended on him. But he couldn't show any cracks. "Not now." "Roman," Dom called, his voice steady but carrying an underlying tension, "you're on the lookout." Keep your eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. Roman nodded, his usual bravado gone. Got it. Tej, you've got the tech. Make sure we're ready to track them the moment they make a move. Tej tapped the side of his head with a smile, the hint of his usual confidence returning. Already on it, boss. Letty, you're with me, Dom said, his eyes locking with hers. There was a silent understanding between them. She had always been his partner, both in and out of the fight. And tonight, more than ever, he needed her by his side. The hours bled into each other as the crew prepared for whatever was coming next. The usual camaraderie, the easy joking between Roman and Tej, was gone. Everyone knew that this time, things were different. There was no more running, no more evading. This wasn't about high-speed chases or outsmarting the enemy, it was about survival. When the time finally came, it came without warning. The first engine growl shattered the silence of the night, its roar unmistakable. The crew was already on high alert, their instincts kicking in as they moved swiftly to their cars. The air crackled with tension as they slid into their vehicles, the once familiar sounds of the engines now carrying the weight of a war that had only just begun. Dom's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the Charger roared to life. Letty was beside him, her expression focused, her gaze unwavering. "Stay close," Dom muttered, his voice rough with the weight of everything that was about to unfold. "Always," Letty replied, her tone steady, even if her heart was racing. The black car was close now. Too close. Dom's grip on the wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white as he scanned the dark streets ahead. The familiar pulse of the city felt different now, like a trap closing in around them. But he wasn't about to let it consume him. He wasn't about to let it consume his family. The black car appeared, emerging from the shadows, sleek and menacing. It moved with purpose, its headlights cutting through the night like a blade. "This is it," Dom said under his breath, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We're not running anymore." The race wasn't for speed, it was for survival. Dom and Letty led the charge, their cars weaving in and out of traffic with precision, a deadly ballet of skill and instinct. Behind them, the rest of the crew followed, each car moving with a purpose. This was no longer about the thrill of the chase. This was war. The black car made its move, cutting across lanes, its driver unrelenting. It was clear now, this was a message, and Dom wasn't about to let it go unanswered. His eyes locked onto the road ahead, every muscle in his body coiled, ready to strike. For a moment, everything fell into place. The rush, the noise, the blinding lights, it all melted away until there was nothing but the road, the car, and the target in front of them. The storm was here, and there was no turning back. End of Chapter 3. In this chapter, the tension peaks as Dom and Letty take the fight to the enemy. The quiet preparation gives way to a high-octane race, underscoring the stakes of their fight and the relentless pace that their world demands. The chapter builds toward an explosive moment, setting the stage for the next phase of their battle. Chapter 4. The Return of Shaw. The air was thick with anticipation as Dom's crew gathered once again, but this time, the mood was different. This wasn't just another mission, it was personal. The name that had surfaced, Deckard Shaw, hung in the air like a ticking time bomb. Everyone in the room knew the danger he represented. They'd crossed paths with his brother, Owen Shaw, before. But Deckard was another level entirely. Dom stood at the head of the table, his fingers tapping the wood as he looked at the faces of his team. They were all there, Letty, Brian, Roman, Tej, and even Mia, who had insisted on being part of the discussion despite Dom's earlier attempts to keep her out of it. "Shaw's no joke," Dom said, his voice low but steady. "We've fought a lot of enemies, but Deckard, he's a whole different animal. He's military, former special forces. This guy doesn't just have connections, he knows how to end lives with his bare hands." Brian's expression darkened. He had fought beside Dom in some of the toughest battles, but the idea of facing someone like Shaw, someone who was just as skilled and ruthless as they were, sent a chill down his spine. "So, what are we looking at here, Dom? A full-on war?" "Could be," Dom replied, his gaze unwavering. "But I'm not waiting around to find out. Shaw's not just coming after us, he's coming after everything we've built. He's targeting our families. He's going after the heart of what makes us who we are." Letty's face was hard, her eyes sharp. "We need to hit him before he gets the chance to strike first." Roman leaned forward, his usual bravado replaced by a rare seriousness. "I say we take the fight to him. We hit him where it hurts." Tej adjusted his glasses, his fingers flying over a keyboard as he worked through the intelligence they had gathered. "I've been tracking his movements. Shaw's not operating alone. He's got an army of mercenaries at his disposal. They're heavily armed, well-trained, and they move in the shadows. We can't just go in guns blazing. We'll need a plan." Mia, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "We don't have to fight this alone. We have allies, people we've worked with before. We can rally support, find out who's with us, and build a network." Dom nodded, appreciating her perspective. "You're right. We've got people who owe us favors, people who trust us. We'll need them all." As the plan began to take shape, Roman and Tej worked together to track down information on Shaw's known associates and safe houses. Letty and Brian hit the streets, seeking any word on his movements or those working with him. Dom, meanwhile, made a few calls to some old friends, people who knew Shaw's world and could help them navigate the labyrinth of danger ahead. That evening, a private jet touched down on a tarmac in the outskirts of the city. The door opened, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out, his boots clicking against the pavement. His face was hard, his jaw clenched with purpose, and his eyes, cold as steel, scanned the area as he surveyed his surroundings. Deckard Shaw had arrived, and with him came a storm that would change everything. Inside the plane, a dark-haired woman waited in the shadows, her eyes burning with a desire for vengeance. She was part of Shaw's network, a mercenary with a ruthless reputation. But she wasn't just following orders. She had her own mission, one that was intertwined with Shaw's, and she would stop at nothing to see it through. Back at the garage, the crew was finalizing their preparations. Dom had gathered the intel, and now it was time to put their plan into action. The sound of engines roaring to life filled the air, the familiar hum of their cars vibrating through their bodies as they checked the last of their weapons and equipment. "We go in fast, hit hard, and make sure Shaw knows we're not backing down," Dom said, his voice steely. "Sounds like a plan," Roman replied, his usual cocky grin back in place. "Let's go show this guy what happens when you mess with family." Tej pulled up a map on his laptop, pinpointing Shaw's known locations and the possible places where he could be hiding. "I've been tracking his movements for hours, but he's good at covering his tracks. We'll have to move fast if we want to catch him before he goes to ground again." Letty stood by Dom's side, her eyes fixed on the map. "So, we've got to be 2 steps ahead. He's already making his move, and we can't afford to get caught in his crosshairs." Brian leaned against a nearby car, arms folded. "You know, I never thought I'd be back in this world. But I guess that's the thing about family, we're all in this together." Mia stood next to him, her expression conflicted. She wanted to help, but she also hated the fact that danger was once again knocking at their door. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said quietly. "I can't lose you again." Brian placed a hand on her shoulder, a reassuring smile on his face. "I'm not going anywhere, Mia. We'll get through this." The crew set off, the streets of Los Angeles flashing past them as they navigated through the city, each one of them laser-focused on the task ahead. Dom drove his Charger with precision, his mind a whirl of thoughts, but one thing remained crystal clear: this wasn't just about survival. This was about justice. As they neared the first target, an abandoned warehouse rumored to be Shaw's hideout, they saw the telltale signs of movement. Several black SUVs were parked in front of the building, and shadows moved behind the cracked windows. It was quiet, too quiet. "Get ready," Dom ordered, his voice low. "This is it." The crew split into 2 teams, Letty and Dom taking the lead, Brian and Roman covering the rear. They moved quickly, silently, their bodies blending with the shadows as they approached the building. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Shaw's men were scattered throughout the building, armed and ready for a fight. But they weren't prepared for what was coming. Dom and Letty breached the entrance, guns drawn, moving with practiced precision. In moments, the first few mercenaries were neutralized, but Shaw's people were formidable. They fought back fiercely, using the shadows to their advantage. Roman and Brian burst in from the rear, guns blazing, providing cover fire as Dom and Letty moved deeper into the warehouse. It didn't take long before they encountered Shaw's right-hand woman, tall, dark, and lethal. The two women faced off in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, their bodies a blur of motion as fists collided and bodies slammed against steel walls. Letty was faster, more agile, but her opponent was relentless. The air was thick with the sound of punches and grunts as the two women grappled for control. But Letty's training and experience gave her the edge, and with a swift move, she took her opponent down. Meanwhile, Dom and Shaw's men clashed in a fierce firefight, bullets ricocheting off steel beams as the two sides engaged in a deadly dance. But Dom's determination and ruthlessness won out. One by one, Shaw's men fell. And then, in the center of the chaos, Dom came face to face with Deckard Shaw. The two men locked eyes, the air crackling with animosity. Shaw smirked, his cold smile not one of victory, but of understanding. "This is just the beginning, Toretto," Shaw said, his voice as cold as ever. "You can't outrun me forever." Dom's eyes burned with intensity as he stepped forward, his hand gripping his weapon tighter. "You want to make this personal, Shaw? You've got it." Here's my take on Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Unmasking the Enemy. The city's pulse was erratic, its streets a labyrinth of danger and opportunity. Dom's charger tore through the night, its engine growling in defiance as the black car continued to stalk them from the rearview. The battle had begun in earnest, but Dom knew this was only the opening move. Whoever was behind that car wasn't just after a race. They were trying to send a message, and Dom couldn't let that message go unanswered. "Stay sharp," Dom muttered under his breath, his eyes flicking between the road ahead and the mirrors. Letty's hand tightened on the dash beside him, her presence a steadying force amidst the chaos. The black car was relentless, closing the gap with every turn, every twist in the road. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't playing by the usual rules. They were here for something else. Letty's voice cut through the tension. "Dom, we can't keep running forever." Dom's jaw tightened as he executed a sharp turn, pushing the charger harder. "I'm not running. I'm setting the pace." But he knew she was right. The time for evasion was over. They couldn't keep dodging the inevitable. They needed to know who they were up against, and fast. With a quick glance, Dom signaled to Letty. "Take the lead," he said, his voice low and controlled. "We'll split them up." Letty didn't need to be told twice. She knew exactly what to do. The crew had always relied on their ability to read each other, to move in sync when it mattered most. This was no different. Letty gunned the engine, pulling ahead of the charger and veering left onto a side street, hoping to force the black car into a trap. Dom followed close behind, the sound of his car merging with the night. But even as the chase intensified, something gnawed at him. The black car wasn't just another rival, they were being toyed with. Dom had been in enough races, enough high-stakes situations to know when the rules had changed. This wasn't about winning. This was about something far more sinister. They darted through narrow alleys and empty streets, the city's skyline barely visible in the distance. It was only when they reached an industrial district that Dom felt a shift in the air, a sudden, sharp jolt that told him the endgame was approaching. They were being funneled into a corner. Dom's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The black car had pulled up alongside them, its tires skimming the asphalt with eerie precision. The headlights flashed briefly, a signal, perhaps, or a warning. But Dom wasn't about to let that intimidate him. Without hesitation, he swerved the charger into a nearby alley, the tires screaming as the car slid into the narrow space between two warehouses. Letty did the same, cutting sharply to the left, forcing the black car to make a decision. "Now!" Dom barked, his voice cold and commanding. Letty's car shot forward like a missile, her foot pressed to the floor. The black car hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough time for Dom and Letty to make their move. The trap had been set. The alley opened up into a dead end, but the crew was already in position. Tej and Roman had been tracking the black car's movements, and now they were ready to make their move. Dom and Letty slowed their cars just enough to keep the black car trapped in the narrowing space. "Let's see who's behind the wheel," Dom muttered, eyes scanning the mirrors. The black car had stopped, its engine growling as if daring them to make the next move. Roman's voice crackled through the comms. "They're not going anywhere." We've got them cornered. Tedge's voice followed, tinged with his usual tech-savvy confidence. Got the tracking signal locked. Whoever they are, they're not from around here. But they're connected. Real connected. Dom's eyes narrowed. How connected? Tedge hesitated for a moment, his voice growing more serious. We're talking high level. The kind of people who don't just send messages, they send a warning. This goes deeper than we thought. Letty's hand instinctively went to the door handle, ready to make her move. You sure about this, Dom? Dom didn't reply immediately. His mind was already working, piecing together the scattered fragments of the puzzle. Whoever they were, they had access to resources. They had muscle. And they had something personal against the Toretto crew. The black car's door opened slowly, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted against the dim light. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadows, but as they stepped closer, Dom could see the outline of a weapon at their side. This wasn't a simple race. This was an execution. The figure finally stopped in front of Dom, who had already stepped out of the charger, his body tense and ready for whatever came next. He wasn't afraid. But he was prepared. The figure spoke, their voice low and clipped. Dom Toretto. You've been running for too long. Dom's eyes didn't waver. Who the hell are you? The figure's lips curled into a smirk, and they pushed back their hood, revealing a face Dom didn't recognize, but the look in their eyes was one of someone who had seen too many battles. Someone who knew the cost of this war. Let's just say I'm someone who's been watching you. And I don't like what I've seen. The tension in the air was suffocating. Dom could feel it tightening around him, like a noose slowly pulling tighter. This wasn't just some personal vendetta. Whoever this person was, they had been studying them, learning their moves. The real question was, why? And what did they want from Dom and his crew? Talk, Dom growled, his voice cold. And make it quick. The figure's smirk faded, replaced by a look of contempt. You're not the only one who's been running, Toretto. But unlike you, I know how to finish what I start. Before Dom could react, the figure reached for their side and pulled out a small device, holding it up for Dom to see. It was a recording. The moment it was activated, the sound of a familiar voice filled the night air, a voice that made Dom's blood run cold. It was Brian O'Connor. Dom, if you're hearing this, it's too late. The figure stepped back, letting the device speak for itself. Game over, Toretto, they said, their voice dripping with satisfaction. Your family's already in play. End of Chapter 4. In this chapter, the intensity escalates as Dom and Letty finally corner their mysterious pursuer, only to be faced with a chilling revelation. The appearance of Brian's voice on the recording adds a personal element to the threat, making it clear that the stakes have just reached a whole new level. The tension between Dom and the stranger sets the stage for the next big confrontation. Chapter 5. The game changes. The night had grown darker, and the streets of Los Angeles felt heavier than ever. The crew had successfully pushed back Shaw's men, but the victory felt hollow. There was no time to savor it, no time to catch their breath. Shaw had made it clear, this war was just beginning, and it wouldn't end with a single skirmish. Dom stood outside the warehouse, staring at the remnants of the battle. The flashing red and blue lights of police cars illuminated the wreckage, but the sirens only added to the chaos in his mind. He didn't feel relief, only the heavy weight of the situation. Shaw had been here. They had fought, but Shaw was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next move. Brian walked up to Dom, his steps slow, measured. We hit them hard. But I can't shake the feeling that we're playing right into Shaw's hands. Dom turned to face his friend. There was no mistaking the tension in Brian's voice. What are you thinking? Brian ran a hand through his hair, glancing over at the wreckage. We're going after Shaw. But I think we need to be smarter about this. He's always one step ahead. Every time we think we've got him cornered, he slips away. Letty's voice cut through the conversation as she approached them, her face a mixture of frustration and resolve. We're not backing down. We'll find him before he has the chance to strike again. But I agree with Brian. Shaw's too calculated. He's playing a long game, and we need to be prepared. Tedge, who had been listening in on the conversation from his laptop, turned around from his workstation. I've been going through Shaw's known associates again. He's got connections everywhere, from the Middle East to Europe. But I found something interesting." He gestured to the screen, where a series of encrypted messages popped up. "There's a pattern. Shaw's been communicating with someone high up in the government, someone who's been helping him cover his tracks. We're not just dealing with a lone wolf here. This goes deeper." Dom clenched his fists. The weight of Tej's words sank in. Shaw wasn't just a rogue mercenary. He was part of something much bigger, and if he had someone in the government backing him, this fight was no longer just about family, it was about justice on a global scale. "We need to take down the network," Dom said, his voice unwavering. "Shaw's no longer just a criminal. He's become part of something we can't ignore." Roman, who had been pacing around the garage, stopped and looked at Dom. "Hold up, man. You're saying we're gonna go after someone in the government? You sure that's a good idea?" Letty shot Roman a look. "He's right. We've been going after Shaw like it's just another mission, but this is bigger than us. We're not just putting ourselves at risk, we're putting the people we care about in danger." Mia, who had been quietly watching the discussion unfold, spoke up. "Dom, you don't have to do this. We've been through enough. We've got our lives now. I don't want to lose anyone again." Dom's heart tightened. He could feel the weight of her words. Mia had always been the one who wanted out of this life, who wished for a simpler, safer existence. But this was their world. It was dangerous, and there was no escaping it now. "I'm not doing this alone," Dom replied, his voice firm. "And I'm not leaving anyone behind. This fight is ours, all of us." Brian stepped forward, placing a hand on Dom's shoulder. "Then we're in this together. Every single one of us." The team set to work, each member of the crew putting their skills to use in tracking down Shaw and his mysterious government ally. Tej scoured through encrypted messages and government databases, trying to pinpoint Shaw's next move. Roman worked the streets, gathering intel from his network of informants, while Letty and Brian dug deeper into the criminal underworld, seeking anyone with knowledge of Shaw's operation. But as the hours passed, the sense of urgency began to mount. They were getting closer, too close. And Shaw was ready for them. The tension in the air was palpable as the crew made their way toward their next target, a luxurious, high-security estate on the outskirts of the city. It was rumored to be one of Shaw's safe houses, and if they were lucky, they might finally find the key to unraveling the web of corruption that had ensnared them all. Dom's Charger roared to life as he slid into the driver's seat, the others following close behind. The sound of engines filled the air, a rhythmic pulse of power and purpose. There was no turning back now. Shaw had made his move, and they were ready to meet it head-on. The estate loomed in the distance, its high walls and fortified gates giving it an air of impenetrable security. But for Dom and his crew, no obstacle was too great. They had made a career out of breaking through walls, physical and metaphorical. Tej scanned the perimeter, his eyes darting between the security systems. "There's a weakness in their surveillance grid," he said, his voice calm as ever. "It's a narrow window, but we can slip through undetected." Dom's eyes narrowed, the plan already forming in his mind. "We take that window. We get inside, and we find Shaw. No hesitation." Roman grinned. "I like it when you get all businesslike, Dom. Makes the job feel real." The crew pulled up to the entrance of the estate, parking in the shadows of a nearby tree. They moved quickly, expertly, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. The night was their ally, and the silence of the estate only added to the intensity of the moment. Inside, the estate was eerily quiet. The opulence of the mansion stood in stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. They moved through the corridors, their steps muffled against the marble floors as they approached the heart of the building. It wasn't long before they found themselves face to face with Shaw's men. The inevitable confrontation had arrived. The fight was swift, but brutal. Bullets flew, bodies collided, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the halls. Dom and Letty took the lead, their movements synchronized as they cleared rooms and neutralized threats. Brian and Roman covered the rear, ensuring that no one got behind them. But just as they thought they were nearing the end of the estate, a figure stepped into the hallway, blocking their path. It was Shaw, standing tall, his cold eyes locking onto Dom's. "You've come a long way, Toretto," Shaw said, his voice a low growl. "But this ends tonight." Dom's jaw tightened. "It doesn't end until I say it does, Shaw." The two men locked eyes, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. This wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning. Shaw had come for them. And now, Dom and his crew would show him just what it meant to mess with family. End of Chapter 5. In this chapter, the tension escalates as the crew discovers the true scale of Shaw's operation and the involvement of powerful figures within the government. The chapter ends with a high-stakes confrontation between Dom and Shaw, setting the stage for the inevitable showdown. The game has changed, and the battle is far from over. Would you like to continue with Chapter 6, or explore another part of the story? Here's my take on Chapter 5. Chapter 5. The Weight of Secrets. The night air was thick with uncertainty as Dom stood still, the sound of Brian's voice still echoing in his mind. Asterisk, it's too late. Asterisk, the words hit him like a punch to the gut, each syllable unraveling something deep within him. Brian, his brother, his partner in everything, had always been the voice of reason, the optimist in a world where hope was in short supply. But now, to hear his voice in such a grim context, it felt like a betrayal. The mysterious figure stood before him, silent but satisfied, as though they'd just delivered the final blow. Dom's eyes never left the device in the stranger's hand, the words replaying over and over in his mind. "Your family's already in play." Dom's fists clenched at his sides, the fury bubbling up from deep within. Whoever this person was, they had been watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, they had made their move. "You think this is going to break me?" Dom's voice was low, dangerous. He took a step forward, his gaze locked on the stranger's, refusing to show any sign of weakness. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, they smirked, almost as if they were enjoying the power they held over him. "You're still pretending this is about you? Your family is already a part of this, Toretto. Whether you like it or not, they're in the game now." "Who the hell are you?" Dom growled, taking another step closer. "And what do you want from us?" The figure's eyes gleamed with an unsettling confidence. "I'm just a messenger. But I'm not the one pulling the strings." Dom's heart raced as the words sank in. This wasn't just about a personal vendetta. Whoever was behind this, whoever was orchestrating this twisted game, had a far-reaching agenda. And Dom knew, without a doubt, that they would stop at nothing to destroy everything he cared about. The figure tilted their head slightly, their gaze lingering on Dom's clenched fists. "I think you know who's behind this. The question is, are you ready to face the truth?" Before Dom could respond, Letty's voice cut through the silence, sharp and urgent. "Dom, we need to move. Now." Dom didn't hesitate. He gave the stranger one last, deadly look before turning and heading for the charger. Letty was already in her car, engine roaring to life. Dom slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut with a sense of finality. Whatever this person knew, whatever game they were playing, they were no longer going to control the pace. "We're going to find out who's behind this," Dom muttered, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of rage. He slammed his foot on the gas, the car lurching forward as they sped away from the alley. Letty's car fell in line beside him, matching his speed with ease. She didn't need to ask where they were headed, she already knew. They were going to get answers, no matter how deep they had to dig. The familiar streets of L.A. blurred as they sped through the city, their tires screeching on the pavement. Dom's mind raced, every thought clouded by the recording and the cryptic message left by the stranger. "Your family's already in play." What did that even mean? Who was pulling the strings, and why target his family now? "Tej, Roman," Dom's voice crackled through the comms. "Where are you two?" Tej's voice came through, smooth and calm, despite the tension in the air. "We're on it, Dom. The black car we've been tracking. It's registered to a high-level organization, some big players. We're talking about people who don't leave anything to chance. They've got resources, connections. Whoever they are, they've been planning this for a while." Roman chimed in, his usual bravado faltering just a bit. "I'll tell you what, Dom. This doesn't feel like just a power move. Feels personal." Dom's grip on the wheel tightened. He knew Roman was right. This wasn't about just taking down the Toretto crew, this was about sending a message. But the question remained, who was sending it, and why now? "Stay on them," Dom ordered, his voice sharp. "We need to know where they're coming from, what they want. I'm not letting anyone touch my family." The comms went quiet for a moment, the weight of Dom's words hanging in the air. The crew had been through countless battles together, but this? This was something different. This wasn't just another job. This was personal. And it was going to cost them. The night stretched on as they maneuvered through the streets, every corner bringing them closer to the answers they needed. But with each passing second, Dom felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Whoever was behind this had been watching them, studying them. And now, they were playing a dangerous game. A game that Dom wasn't about to lose. As they approached an old industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, Dom's phone buzzed. It was a message from Brian. "Dom, you need to stop. They're using you. This isn't just about us anymore. It's bigger than you think. Stay out of it." Dom's heart skipped a beat as he read the message. It's bigger than you think. What did that even mean? And why was Brian sending this now, after everything that had happened? "Dom." Letty's voice broke through his thoughts. She was watching him closely, her expression one of concern. "You okay?" Dom didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. His mind was spinning, and every answer he thought he had only raised more questions. "We keep going," he said finally, his voice firm. "We find out who's behind this. And we end it." The industrial complex loomed ahead, its rusted gates and darkened windows an ominous sign of what awaited them inside. Dom knew that whatever they were walking into, it wasn't going to be easy. But it was the only way forward. As they pulled into the complex's parking lot, the sound of their engines seemed to fade into the night. The air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, the shadows playing tricks on the eyes. Dom's eyes flicked around the lot, searching for any sign of movement, any clue that could point them in the right direction. And then he saw it. A familiar silhouette emerging from the shadows, a face he hadn't seen in years. It was Mia. Her presence here, at this moment, was the last thing Dom had expected. He stepped out of the car, his heart racing, the weight of the situation pushing him forward. "Mia!" Dom's voice broke the silence, disbelief heavy in his tone. Mia's eyes met his, her expression filled with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far from it either. She looked different, tired, worn, but the moment their eyes locked, Dom could feel the distance between them close. "Dom," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I didn't want you to get involved. But you're already in too deep." End of Chapter 5. In this chapter, the stakes continue to rise as Dom and Letty press forward, determined to uncover the truth behind the cryptic message and the shadowy figures pursuing them. The revelation of Mia's involvement adds another layer of complexity, hinting that this situation runs much deeper than Dom originally thought. The tension is palpable, and the crew's loyalty and unity are about to be tested in ways they never imagined. Chapter 6. Bloodlines and Betrayal. The mansion's cold marble floors seemed to stretch endlessly beneath Dom's feet as he squared off against Deckard Shaw. The air between them was charged with the energy of years of battle, revenge, and unspoken history. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was personal. Shaw, ever the stoic, cracked a dark smile. He was taller than Dom, but the intensity in Dom's eyes was like a storm waiting to break. The space between them was filled with an unspoken understanding. There could only be one victor. "You think you can stop me?" Shaw's voice was low, but there was a quiet confidence in it. "You've been playing in my world for too long, Toretto. You've meddled with things you can't understand." Dom's fists clenched, the familiar rage rising in his chest, but it was controlled, honed. His mind, too, was sharper now. He wasn't going to fall for Shaw's bait. "Not this time." "I know exactly what I'm getting into," Dom replied, his voice steady, despite the storm that was raging inside him. "But you're nothing but a shadow of your brother. A coward hiding behind a mask of vengeance." At those words, Shaw's expression shifted slightly, though the coldness never left his eyes. The mention of his brother, Owen Shaw, struck a nerve, but it wasn't anger that flickered across his face. It was something more sinister, more dangerous. Shaw took a step forward, his stance poised and controlled. You think this is about vengeance? It's bigger than that, Toretto. You wouldn't understand. What I'm doing is the start of something far greater than you can imagine. Dom didn't need to hear more. This wasn't just about Shaw's personal vendetta anymore. It never really had been. It was about something darker, something that threatened everything they had built. The moment was broken by the sound of movement behind Shaw. A second figure appeared in the doorway, a tall, dark-haired woman dressed in black tactical gear, moving with purpose. She was no stranger to this kind of world, and her presence sent a chill down Dom's spine. Tej's voice echoed in Dom's earpiece, crackling through the comms. Dom, we've got intel. That woman, she's his right hand. She's not just a merc. She's high up in the government's covert ops division. They've been working together for years. She's the one who's been helping him stay one step ahead. Dom's pulse quickened, but he kept his eyes locked on Shaw. So you're not just a hired gun, Dom said, his tone laced with contempt. You've got someone inside. You're running the show, not just the streets. Shaw didn't flinch. Everything has its price, Toretto. The question is, how much are you willing to pay? The woman behind Shaw stepped forward, her cold eyes scanning the room. This ends tonight, Toretto. You and your team have no idea what you've unleashed. Enough talk, Dom said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Let's finish this. With a swift move, Shaw lunged forward, his body language calculating, his strikes fast and precise. Dom's instincts kicked in immediately. The two men collided with brutal force, fists connecting with bone, each blow a reflection of the history that had led them to this point. But Shaw was no ordinary opponent. He moved like a predator, his every strike designed to wound and disable. Dom was used to this kind of fight, but Shaw's precision was unsettling. Every movement felt deliberate, calculated. Shaw was toying with him, testing him, finding his weaknesses. But Dom wasn't about to let him win. The sound of footsteps echoed through the mansion as Letty, Brian, and Roman burst into the hallway, weapons drawn. They moved with the same precision they had practiced time and time again, covering Dom's back as the fight intensified. Roman took a moment to survey the situation. So, this is what you've been hiding all along, Shaw? You thought you could take us down with your little army? Focus, Roman, Brian shouted, pushing him forward as he aimed his gun at Shaw's remaining men who had moved to flank Dom. We've got bigger problems right now. Shaw's right-hand woman, who had been watching the fight with cold calculation, shifted her attention. Move now, she barked at Shaw's men. They reacted instantly, rushing into the fray, creating chaos in the narrow hallways of the estate. Brian and Letty dived into the action, their guns blazing, clearing the way as Dom and Shaw continued their brutal hand-to-hand combat. Every punch Dom threw, every block Shaw made, echoed in the tense air. They were like two forces of nature, each unwilling to back down, each determined to leave the other broken. But as Dom took another step forward to land a decisive blow, Shaw ducked low, shifting his weight with surprising agility, and knocked Dom off balance. Dom stumbled back, his breath ragged as he tried to regain his footing. Is this what you wanted, Toretto? Shaw sneered, stepping closer. To be the hero. To protect your little family. He glanced toward the doorway where Mia stood, watching in silence, her hand gripping her gun. The people you care about will be the ones who suffer the most. Those words hit Dom like a punch to the gut. For a split second, doubt crept into his mind. He had lived and breathed for family, but had his obsession with vengeance and justice clouded his judgment? Had he been so focused on stopping Shaw that he had risked everything that mattered? But then, as quickly as the doubt arrived, it was gone. He couldn't afford to falter now. He'd fought too hard to keep his family safe, and Shaw's words only served to fuel his determination. Shaw wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing Dom break. With a roar, Dom surged forward, grabbing Shaw by the collar and throwing him against the wall with a deafening crash. The fight had reached its boiling point. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no turning back. Shaw struggled to rise, but Dom was already on top of him, his hands wrapped around Shaw's neck in a lethal grip. This ends now, Dom growled, his voice filled with raw intensity. Not yet, Shaw spat, his hand reaching for a hidden blade. But before he could strike, a sudden blast rang out, the sound reverberating through the mansion. Dom's grip tightened, but Shaw's right-hand woman had fired, her bullet narrowly missing Dom and striking one of Shaw's men. The distraction was enough. Shaw twisted his body out of Dom's grasp, scrambling to his feet and retreating toward the back of the mansion. His right-hand woman was already gone, her movements swift as she disappeared into the shadows. "Damn it!" Brian shouted, charging forward. "We've got to move now." But Shaw was already vanishing into the night. This fight wasn't over. The battle had only just begun. End of Chapter 6. In this chapter, the confrontation between Dom and Shaw reaches a boiling point as family secrets are revealed, and the true scale of Shaw's operation becomes clear. The intensity of the fight builds as the stakes rise. This is no longer just about personal vendettas, but a battle that could determine the future of everything Dom and his crew hold dear. Would you like to continue with Chapter 7, or explore another part of the narrative? Here's Chapter 6 in my style. Chapter 6. The Truth in the Shadows. The night had taken on a weight of its own, thick, suffocating. Every inch of the industrial complex seemed to pulse with an unseen menace. The sound of engines, once a comfort to Dom, now felt like an echo of impending disaster. He could hear his heart thudding in his chest, but it was drowned by the looming uncertainty that wrapped around them like a dark shroud. Mia's sudden appearance had thrown him off balance. His instincts told him something was wrong, but his mind couldn't process it all. Mia, his sister, had always been the calm in the storm. But now, seeing her here, after everything that had happened, the uncertainty in her eyes only deepened the shadows creeping through his thoughts. Dom's gaze locked onto her, trying to read her face for some sign, some explanation. But the expression that met him was a mixture of exhaustion and fear, as if she were caught in something far deeper than she'd ever let on. "Mia," Dom said again, his voice softer this time, unsure of how to bridge the gap between the family he knew and the woman standing before him. "What's going on? Why are you here? And why are you trying to keep us out of it?" Mia stepped closer, her eyes darting around the parking lot, as though making sure they weren't being watched. The tension in the air only heightened with her hesitation. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to pull you back into this, Dom. You and Letty," she stopped herself, glancing briefly at Letty, who stood by Dom's side, watching her with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "I didn't want to see you all get hurt. But this is bigger than us." Dom felt a surge of anger, the edges of his frustration sharpening into something dangerous. "Stop dancing around it, Mia. Who's behind this? Who the hell is playing games with our family?" Mia swallowed hard, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, it felt as though she was trying to convey something without words, something unspoken but deeply felt. But whatever it was, she couldn't bring herself to say it. "I don't have all the answers, Dom," she said finally, her voice breaking as if the weight of the truth was more than she could bear. "But I know who's behind this. And it's someone you don't want to face." Dom's patience snapped, the frustration flooding through him like a raging river. "Who, Mia?" His voice was low, but there was a certain sharpness to it, one that let Mia know he wasn't going to let this go. "Tell me. Now." Mia's face paled, and she stepped back slightly, as if the very mention of the name made her physically recoil. "It's Cypher," she said, the name leaving her lips with an unsettling calmness. "She's the one pulling the strings." The name hit Dom like a freight train, every muscle in his body going rigid. Cypher. The woman who had manipulated them all, the mastermind behind some of their most dangerous missions. The woman who had nearly torn their family apart. "Cypher," Dom repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. "She's still out there." Mia nodded, her expression one of helplessness. "She's always been out there, Dom. She's been working in the shadows for years. And now she's targeting you. All of us." Letty's jaw tightened, her gaze fixed on Mia. "Why are you helping her? What's your role in all of this?" Mia flinched, but only for a moment, before she stood straighter, her resolve hardening. "I'm not helping her. I'm trying to stop her. But she's too powerful. I've been tracking her for months now, trying to find a way to bring her down. But I'm not the only one in this game." Dom took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "You've been working with her all this time?" "No," Mia snapped. "I've been working against her. But you have to understand, Dom, she's dangerous. And she's smarter than any of us. She's made moves in places we can't even see." Before Dom could respond, a sharp crack of distant gunfire echoed across the complex. His instincts kicked in, and in an instant, he was on alert, his eyes scanning the shadows. The moment had shifted. Whatever Mia was about to reveal, it had been interrupted by something far more immediate. "Get to the cars," Dom ordered, his voice suddenly sharp. "We're not alone." Without another word, Mia spun on her heels and headed for the rear entrance, where their vehicles were parked. Letty followed Dom, moving quickly, staying close, but their eyes never left Mia. Trust wasn't something that came easy, especially not now. But in this world of uncertainty, sometimes the enemy of my enemy was the only ally left. Dom's hand hovered over the grip of his door handle as they approached the Charger. He knew the weight of the situation was more than he could carry alone. Cypher was back, and this time, she was playing for keeps. As the rest of the crew arrived, Roman and Tej sliding into position beside him, Dom's mind raced. The pieces were finally falling into place, but they were still incomplete. Cypher had a bigger game in motion than any of them had realized. "We can't let her control the board," Tej said, his tone laced with concern. "Not again." Dom nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of Brian, his brother who had always been the heart of the crew, the one who kept them grounded. Brian had warned him to stay out of this. But Dom wasn't one to back down, not when his family was at risk. No, this wasn't about survival anymore, it was about vengeance. The roar of the engines filled the air once again, their cars a symphony of power and precision. But this time, it wasn't just for the thrill. This was war. And war was coming. As they sped away from the complex, the tension between them was palpable. They were no longer a family bound by just loyalty, they were a family bound by survival. And Cypher had made it clear, she would stop at nothing to destroy them. Dom's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. He had always been a man of action, but this time, the enemy wasn't someone he could outrun. Cypher had gone too far, and she wasn't going to stop until she had destroyed everything he held dear. As they drove into the night, Dom's thoughts were consumed by one singular purpose, to find Cypher before she could strike again. And when he did, it would be the last move she ever made. End of Chapter 6. In this chapter, the stakes rise dramatically as Dom confronts Mia about her involvement with Cypher, the return of their old foe. The chapter ends on a tense note, as the crew gears up for what is shaping up to be a full-blown war. The fear, the urgency, and the resolve to protect his family all play a role as Dom begins to understand the true depth of the threat they're facing. Would you like me to continue with the next chapter? Chapter 7, Into the Abyss. The night had become a blur of flashing lights, the sharp sting of gunfire, and the echo of engines that roared with unrelenting fury. The crew had narrowly escaped Shaw's clutches, but Dom knew this was far from over. The walls were closing in, and they were no longer just playing defense. They were running out of time, and Shaw had already proven that he could outmaneuver them at every turn. They regrouped in their safe house, an abandoned warehouse tucked away in a quiet part of the city. The place was far from glamorous, but it had always been a haven for the team when things went sideways. Dom stood in front of a map spread across the table, his finger tracing the routes Shaw could be taking, the places he could be hiding. There were too many options, too many variables. And each one led back to one simple fact: Shaw had them right where he wanted them. Tej was the first to speak, his voice tense but focused. "I've dug into Shaw's financial records, but it's a maze. He's got shell companies all over the world, ones that are nearly impossible to trace back to him. This is bigger than just a manhunt. It's a global network." Dom looked up from the map, his eyes meeting Tej's. "And what does that mean for us? We can't just keep chasing shadows." "It means we need leverage," Tej replied, his eyes narrowing. "Shaw's always been one step ahead because he's got something on everyone. But if we can find his weak spot, if we can get to the people who fund his operations, we might have a chance to pull him out of the shadows." Roman, who had been silent until now, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "So we're going after his money? That sounds like a plan that could either blow up in our faces or make Shaw go full scorched earth on us. That's the risk we're willing to take, Dom said, his tone resolute. Shaw doesn't think we can get to him. He doesn't think we're willing to go as far as he is. But that's where he's wrong. We're going to show him just how far we're willing to go. Letty, who had been pacing the room, stopped and turned to face Dom. I know what you're trying to do, Dom. You want to hit him where it hurts, where he's most vulnerable. But we need to be smart about this. Shaw has no problem crossing lines, and I'm not sure how much farther we can push before it becomes too dangerous. Dom looked at Letty, his eyes softening just for a moment. He understood her concern. She had always been the one who kept him grounded, the one who reminded him of the cost of the battles they fought. But this time, there was no other choice. They couldn't afford to wait. Shaw was coming for them, if not tonight, then tomorrow. We won't back down, Dom said, his voice low but unwavering. We're in this together. And I'm not losing anyone. Brian, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke. His voice was calm but tinged with the same determination that ran through the entire crew. Let's get to work. We don't know where Shaw's going next, but we know he's not done. And neither are we. Hours later, the crew was in full motion. Tej had cracked the code on Shaw's financial network, and they had found a lead, an arms deal scheduled for the next day, in a remote warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the best shot they had. Shaw's people would be there, and if they could intercept the deal, they might be able to catch him off guard. The plan was simple: move fast, hit hard, and get out before Shaw could react. But Dom knew that nothing about this would be simple. Every move they made had to be perfect, every step calculated. There was no room for error. The team arrived at the warehouse under the cover of darkness, their cars parked out of sight. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only comes before a storm. The mission was set. But as they made their way toward the entrance, Roman's voice came through the comms. Yo, I don't like this, man. It's too quiet. You sure we're not walking into a trap? Dom didn't hesitate. We stick to the plan. We move in fast, hit them hard, and we leave. No messing around. But the moment they entered the warehouse, Dom felt the shift. The air was off, too still, too quiet. He motioned for the team to spread out, scanning the area with a practiced eye. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the room, and the echo of their footsteps seemed louder than it should have been. Everything about this felt wrong. Tej's voice broke through the silence. Dom, I've got movement on the north side. Someone's coming in. But they're not alone. Dom signaled for the team to prepare, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment had arrived. Shaw had set them up. The door at the far end of the warehouse burst open, and a group of heavily armed men flooded the room, their weapons raised. Shaw's people. They had been waiting for them. Move now, Dom shouted, and the crew sprang into action. Letty and Brian charged forward, guns blazing, while Roman and Tej provided cover. The chaos erupted in an instant. Bullets flew, cars screeched into the warehouse, and the sound of violence echoed off the metal walls. But Shaw wasn't here. Not yet. And that was the problem. We need to find him, Letty yelled, ducking behind a stack of crates to reload. He's not just sending his guys after us. He's planning something bigger. Dom scanned the room, trying to piece together the puzzle. The guns, the armored vehicles, the sheer number of people, it was all too much. Shaw was testing them, pushing them to the limit. He wasn't going to stop until they were all dead. Then, the sound of a familiar engine roared to life outside the warehouse. Dom's heart skipped a beat. The black Charger. Shaw was here. The doors to the warehouse slammed open, and there he was, Deckard Shaw, standing tall and menacing, flanked by his personal security team. The moment the crew laid eyes on him, they knew this was it. The final showdown. You really thought you could outsmart me, Toretto? Shaw's voice echoed through the chaos, cutting through the noise like a knife. You've played right into my hands. Dom took a deep breath, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle of his gun. You've underestimated me, Shaw. And that's your mistake. The two men locked eyes. No more words, just pure, unrelenting hatred. They were about to finish what they had started. End of Chapter 7. In this chapter, the crew faces a harrowing setup as they prepare to confront Shaw once and for all. The tension builds as Shaw manipulates the situation, leading to a high-stakes showdown that pushes them to their limits. Dom and Shaw are on a collision course, and neither is willing to back down. Would you like to continue with Chapter 8, or explore another part of the story? Here's Chapter 7. Chapter 7, The Enemy Within. The night felt different now, the air charged with the kind of electricity that promised a storm. As Dom and the crew made their way through the city streets, the rumble of their engines seemed to reverberate in the very ground beneath them. The sleek, polished machines they drove were more than just vehicles now. They were the last line of defense in a war that was already in full motion. The family had never faced an enemy like Cypher before. This wasn't about outrunning a rival or stealing a fast car anymore. It was about survival. The streets of Los Angeles, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a maze, each corner holding an unknown threat. The crew moved as one, a seamless unit honed by years of battles fought in the shadows. But this time, they weren't just racing against time. They were racing against a mastermind who could anticipate their every move. Dom's grip tightened on the steering wheel of the Charger as they weaved through traffic, his mind spinning with the weight of everything that had been revealed. Cypher was out there, lurking in the shadows, manipulating everything around them. But what troubled him most wasn't just Cypher's return. It was the way she had slipped through their defenses without a trace. She had always been a shadow, a ghost, but now it felt personal. "We need a plan," Letty said, her voice cutting through the silence as she drove beside him. "Cypher's got the advantage right now. We're reacting, not leading." Dom glanced over at her, meeting her eyes for a split second. He could see the same burning resolve in her face that he knew was reflected in his own. Letty wasn't just the woman he loved. She was his partner in every sense of the word. And right now, they were in this together, no matter what it took. "I know," Dom replied, his voice steady but tinged with the exhaustion of the long road ahead. "But first, we need to find out where she's hiding. Then we can figure out how to get to her." "We've got connections," Tej piped up from the back seat of the car, his fingers already flying across his phone. "I can dig up some intel. Find out if there's a pattern to her movements, a location she's been frequenting." Roman, who had been unusually quiet up until now, suddenly spoke up, his tone laced with a hint of concern. "You think Cypher's really just out here running the show, or is there something more to this? She doesn't strike me as the kind of person who plays her hand so openly." Dom's jaw tightened. He'd been wondering the same thing. Cypher had always been one to manipulate events from behind the scenes, never revealing too much. But now, she was making bold moves, coming for them head-on. It didn't add up. There was something deeper at play here, something bigger than just a power grab. "I don't know," Dom muttered, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the road ahead. "But I'm not waiting for her to make the next move." The car's engine growled as Dom hit the accelerator, pushing the Charger faster through the streets. The city blurred around them, the bright lights flickering like stars in the distance. But the farther they drove, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on him. It wasn't just Cypher they had to worry about, it was everything she represented. The way she used people. The way she tore families apart. He remembered the first time he had crossed paths with her, the cold, calculating woman who had manipulated them all for her own gain. But even then, he had seen something more in her, a darkness that went beyond ambition. Cypher wasn't just trying to conquer the world. She was trying to break it, piece by piece. As they neared the outskirts of the city, Tej spoke up again, pulling Dom from his thoughts. "Got a lead. Looks like Cypher's been funneling some resources through an old industrial complex just outside the city. It's off the grid. No surveillance, no records." Roman let out a low whistle from the back seat. "If she's hiding out there, then we're about to walk straight into her lair." "We don't have much choice," Dom replied, his voice hardening. "It's the only lead we've got. We find Cypher, we end this once and for all." The crew exchanged looks, their expressions a mixture of determination and uncertainty. This wasn't just another mission. It was personal. Cypher had come after their family once before, and now she was threatening everything they had built. This time, Dom wasn't going to let her walk away. As they turned off onto a secluded road leading to the industrial complex, the gravity of the situation settled over them. The area was deserted, the only sounds the hum of their engines and the distant echo of the city behind them. They pulled into the complex, the dark buildings looming like ghosts in the night. Dom killed the engine and stepped out of the car, his instincts immediately on high alert. The place felt wrong, empty, like a trap waiting to be sprung. Letty followed closely behind him, her hand resting on the grip of her gun. The others fell in line, their movements synchronized, as they scanned their surroundings. Tej was already pulling up his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. There's no sign of activity yet. No movement, no vehicles. But that doesn't mean she's not here. Dom's eyes narrowed. Cypher was never predictable. She wouldn't let them get close without a fight. "Keep your heads on a swivel," he ordered. "We move in tight. No one goes off on their own." The crew nodded, ready for whatever came next. They entered the building cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the thick, concrete floors. The faint echo of their movements bounced off the cold metallic walls. Each corner they turned brought them closer to the unknown. And then they found it. A large, open room at the heart of the complex. But it wasn't empty. No, this room had been meticulously prepared. The walls were lined with monitors, each screen showing footage of various parts of the city, neighborhoods, streets, and even the faces of the crew members themselves. It was a setup, a trap, but it wasn't just a trap for them. This was Cypher's command center. And then they saw her. Cypher stood in the center of the room, her back turned to them, as though she had been expecting them all along. The faint glow of the screens reflected off her cold, calculating face, and for the first time in a long while, Dom felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "You came," Cypher said, her voice smooth as silk, the taunting undertone unmistakable. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Dom's hands clenched into fists, every muscle in his body primed for the confrontation. "This ends now, Cypher." She turned slowly, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You think it's that simple? You think I'm just going to roll over and let you win? You don't understand, Dom. This was never about you. It was always about the game. And the game has only just begun." End of Chapter 7. In this chapter, the tension heightens as Dom and the crew close in on Cypher's lair. The discovery of her command center reveals her true intentions. She's been playing a long game, one that's far from over. The chapter sets the stage for a showdown, one that will test the limits of their loyalty and survival instincts. The enemy is finally face to face with them, but it's clear the battle is far from won. Would you like to continue with the next chapter?